Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Certified Forgotten. A friendly reminder that we are your podcast that reviews films, reviews is a strong word, discusses, dialogues, editorializes about films with 10 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, then congratulations, you've found the right podcast. It's me. I'm Matt Monagle. I'm the problem. It's me. And I am joined, as always, by my good friend and colleague, Matt Donato, who is coming off a hell of a week, but is here bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Am I correct?
No, I'm hungover.
Okay. All right. So that's the energy we've got in the studio right now. I will be doing some heavy lifting, but that's okay because Donato's got this. You've done this a million times before. You can tap into those inner reservoirs.
I've also done this podcast hungover many times before, whether you knew it or not. So I think we'll be okay to judging how the past goes.
Can I ask what the correlation is to how hungover you are versus how many times you fuck with like the soundboard on this? Is it like a 1-to-1 kind of thing?
It's not exclusive. Sometimes it's just me being a little rascal, but I get a little adventurous when I'm hungover and I need to kind of keep my spirits high. But yeah, I mean, like, listen, I got a gravelly voice coming off the Critics' Choice Awards. It's all for a privileged reason. It's all for a good reason. So there is no complaints on the Donato side. I'm bringing it 100% because I do it to myself.
I love it. Well, if this is one of the first podcasts you're listening to this year, then welcome to another great year in horror. We already have titles like Sick and Skinamarink and M3gan that are taking various stages of theatrical and streaming by storm right now. So for people that run a podcast like ours and run a website like ours, this is already shaping up to be a very exciting year. And as we do with every episode, we are joined by a really great guest who is going to take a deep dive into their movie of choosing. So, Donato, if you can sober the fuck up enough to introduce our guest, let's do that now.
I'm gonna try to get through this, but I'm kind of excited for this one, especially because it is the direct track of someone who has written for us first, came to us as a brilliant writer, and pitched some wonderful pieces. I'm sure we will discuss very briefly, but one such piece was on the movie we're talking about today, and it was so good that it earned them the immediate invite of like, hello, this movie fits, why don't we talk about it? So yeah, without badgering on any more about it, I'd like to welcome our guest this week, Sezin Koehler, a pop culture writer who you can now see on Entertainment Weekly, and she also has a book coming out on Keanu goddamn Reeves.
Mm-hmm. welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Y'all are funny.
This is the way we talk to each other when the cameras are off too. So it kind of like it's a very easy bleed over into the podcast.
Oh, it's fantastic. I love it. I feel like it's family already, so it's great.
Hell yeah. Sezin, I want to start by talking a little bit about, we like to start with our guests and get their early days of horror, but I want to pay you a compliment first before we get started, because you are my favorite type of writer that I've come across since Donato and I started Certified Forgotten, which is that I was not familiar with your work, did not follow you on social media. You dropped a pitch into our inbox and the two of us were just like, ooh, good pitch. And we published that. And then we published another one and we started following you and engaging with you on social media. And now you are, if people were like, oh, who are some horror writers I should follow? You're going to be one of the first people I mentioned. So you are, to me, kind of like, I don't want to say a success story, but one of my favorite things about running Certified Forgotten is when somebody comes into our inbox on a blind pitch and then becomes part of our expanded network of film critics that we really admire and like connecting with.
Oh man, thank you so much. That is lovely. That's really just such a lovely compliment. And yeah, what I love about what you guys do is that I have the craziest pitches. I mean, as y'all have learned, I don't see things the way other people see them. So, and there's not a lot of room for that, especially I find in the horror community. I feel like, yeah, there's not a lot of challenging the narratives that are going on necessarily. And that's what I love about you guys, like that you would take, like, for example, my complete recontextualization of Blair Witch as a fae horror, or folk horror, but more, it's a fairy tale. It's not, maybe not a witch at all. Stuff like that. Like, where else would I send that? And, that story that had been in my brain for like a year. And it was starting to get to a point where it was like painful having it living in my head and not sharing it with anyone. And then it was like, hey, why haven't you already sent this to them? Like, just send it. So, for me as well, like following you guys, because I mean, I was following you guys for a while and I was like, okay, so get the list of the weirdest stuff. and then send it. And so I actually started pretty tame with the village piece, and it's been ramping up. So yeah, I appreciate you guys so much too. You do great work, and you're great editors as well. So I mean, just everything about working with y'all is awesome.
Let's just keep complimenting each other this entire pod. This is just the podcast of us complimenting each other and going in circles. But I mean, I do want to comment very quickly on what you just said, Sezin. If you are looking to pitch Certified Forgotten, I would highly suggest reading Sezin's pieces because, as Monagle said before, like kind of what we do and what we want to do in this space is create an outlet that is absolutely pushing out content that no one else would kind of give a chance to right now. And Sezin, you are 100% correct. It's like the main sites, you're going for SEO, you're going for what's popular, you're going for what the people want to read. And of course, our business model is to do the opposite because we're fucking great at business, obviously. But legitimately though, like your pieces are, we try to stay away a little bit from the popular titles. And, we always tell people, like, if you're going to pitch us on Blair Witch, if you're going to pitch us on The Village, it's got to be something that is really going to be only for us. Like, you're giving us a pitch that goes, okay, this is a popular movie, but we're going to break our rule a little bit to get this out there. And I really, if you're going to pitch us again, I can't stress this enough. Go read those pieces, and that's what you kind of got to bring.
Donato, I'll always remember that you actually messaged me because you typically do the first edits on pieces, and I was like, oh, how did the first pass of the Sezin's Blair Witch piece? And you were like, I think I can never approach this movie again the same way. Like you literally were like, I think this changed how I view this movie forever. And I was like, oh fuck, that's cool.
Yeah, and actually, like, so from that piece, I'm actually turning that piece into a full book. So I have been going through and I've been recontextualizing a lot of movies that people would not necessarily consider fae or folk horror, and I'm recontextualizing them. So like films like Revenge and Mad Max, and like, I mean, I have like a whole, oh my gosh, you should see the file with all of the titles, and oh my god, it's so cool. So that should be my next project. So I've got Keanu Book is going on right now, and then there's Bill and Ted University, so that's also in progress. So the Fey horror recontextualization should be probably in the next couple of years. I'll get that out there. But yeah, but it was really cool, just like, that a piece as well that I wrote for you guys is like turned into this huge project, and like really that book is going to blow people's minds too, because a lot of the titles that I'm looking at in there, I mean, I didn't even get any threats or harassment or anything after the Blair Witch article, which I was kind of like, oh, like this is really taking off. People are going to start getting angry with me. But I think they're almost so shocked that they were like, okay, first off, how does she know about all this? And that's a little scary. Like maybe that's scary by itself. But then second, like the more you try to argue against my theory, the more it makes sense. Like really. So you could just keep digging, but you're just going to dig yourself more further and further into fairyland. And which I just thought that was really, really, really cool. And so, yeah, so that was like one of the first popular pieces I've written. I mean, I think maybe even in my career that didn't result in any kind of like harassment campaign or anything. So like, it's also special to my heart just for that reason, because man, it's really annoying being a woman on the internet sometimes. Like, actually, most of the time. Really, like, why? It's a movie. Like, do you need to threaten someone with like bodily harm because you don't agree with them? Like, there has been so much of that nonsense. So it's just been really nice, like, that my pieces have been so contentious in theory with you guys, but I haven't had any of that like violent pushback that I have with like a lot of other things. So I mean, that's just been really, really cool too. I feel like Certified Forgotten has its own little protective sphere around it somehow, and I don't know, maybe it's just like the straight up weirdness of it, and that's kind of like the buffer that somehow keeps all of the like the wickedness from coming through into the DMs and into the messages. But like, yeah, it's funny.
We don't deal a lot in sacred cows. I mean, like intentionally, it's Certified Forgotten. So we've are blessed to have a ton of really good pitches in our inbox right now. We're kind of going through a little bit and seeing what's going to be on the docket for February and March. But a lot of the things that I think people would get really upset about are going to be the pitches that unfortunately Donato and I are going to pass on. And it's the weird shit that nobody's seen. I think Don't Go in the Woods is a good example of that. Nobody's going to roll into your mentions being like, I have strong opinions on Don't Go in the Woods. And we'll talk about the movie when we talk about the movie. But I think one of the beautiful things about this format is, if we're lucky, it does give writers an opportunity to not only pursue what they want, but do so where they're kind of, you can't pretend that they're not an expert, right? You can pretend in a lot of different venues especially with women, especially with people of color. They're like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, let me explain to you what this movie is. But when you're dealing with a movie that came out on, you know, Tubi in 2017 and has 400 views or something, and somebody's writing 1,000 words on that, it's really hard for even the worst parts of the internet to go onto Twitter and be like, actually, let me explain what this movie's about for you.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I love the community that you've built. And every time that an article comes out, I'm always just like, oh man, this is just so good, and it's always so different. Like just all of the writers you have are so, man, the voices are so strong, so unique, and it's just such a pleasure. It's just always, and even if I'm not going to watch the movie, I love to read the pieces anyway because they're just so good. It's the thought
Mm.
processes are so good, and you're like, man, just like a group of weirdos. And oh, I love it. It's just like, it's fantastic. Yeah, I'm just so happy that you guys you've done this because really, like, I just feel like we need to have more little things like this where, not that this is little, but like, you
Oh,
know,
it's little. It's little.
it's little, but I don't know. I feel like the writing that comes out is so big that it's hard for me to kind of marginalize you guys in that way. And I feel like because the voices are so strong, and you really find these like really just such fascinating takes on things that like I just wish there was more of that. Like I hope that you guys grow and double, triple, quadruple so that you can feature more of the pitches that you get in your inbox because, like, seriously, y'all definitely have an eye, and the stuff that ends up on the site is just, it's just so good. I mean, it's my favorite site. So, yeah. So, I mean, again, it's just such an honor to be on here because I'm like, oh man, these are my favorite. Like, and then I get to be on the podcast. Like, yeah, this is winning for sure.
The favorite stuff that like you're talking about and that we like to do, I'm trying to think recently, we commissioned like a poet to write about like the baby. We commissioned like a librarian who's like, I've never written about horror before, but I have this idea percolating, can I try it here? And we're like, hell yeah, because like like these people who come from not the horror world or whatever you want to call it, not horror Twitter, not horror this or that, and they're just appreciators of horror. And like I like the fact that we can kind of shine a light on the fact that you don't have to be in these circles just to write these brilliant things or talk about or just show an appreciation of horror. So that's what we're going to keep striving to do.
We can, and listen, we probably would just talk about how much we all love this thing that we work on together. But I don't want to go too much farther without Sezin talking a little bit about your history as a writer too. Um, I know that you have been writing for a long time. I've dug into your bio now. We've had a chance to kind of see the work that you've done and get familiar with the different places that you've written before. But for somebody who might be listening to this podcast, if you're Vincent D'Onofrio and you're listening to this podcast for the first time and you're wondering, like, who is this person that keeps bringing my movie to the forefront? Talk a little bit about, the beginning of your horror journey. Did you start thinking about or writing about or enjoying horror? Was it something you grew up with? Was it something you started in school? Where did that kind of the road meet the rubber when it comes to your journey as a horror fan and writer?
Oh, wow. So, oh yeah, so I've been a horror fan since I was a little kid. I saw American Werewolf in London when I was probably around 4 or 5, maybe, and it's definitely like I have a long memory. Like I remember my childhood pretty well, and it's that moment is burned in my brain, and to this day, like werewolves are my favorite monsters. So yeah, so it started really early, and I think there's a lot that goes with it. So I mean, I was writing from a very young age too, and I was always coming up with weird little horror stories and little horror poems, and but like not just horror. I was also I was writing all kinds of stuff. I mean, I've been writing since I was really small, and yeah, horror. I think also had a really difficult upbringing, and a lot of violence and a lot of moving around a lot because of my mom's job. And so there was a lot of instability and insecurity in my life, on multiple levels. And I always found that horror was very comforting. And so horror was kind of, it just sort of became my safe place where first off, it was like, oh, okay, so my family is not the only one that's fucked up. Like, man, there's like a bunch of, like, oh my God, when I first read Stephen King, I was like, oh, thank God for this, and Flowers in the Attic. I was like, oh my God, thank God. Cause like, I thought that I was alone in this like circle of violence and awful fucked upness. And so, yeah, so those narratives for me really became sources of comfort. Um, and then, of course, it just kind of feels inevitable that I would eventually write a horror novel, which basically my college thesis is called American Monsters, and it was sort of an ethnographic. It was an imaginary ethnography of the Southern California rave scene through the lens of the exploitation of women and girls, um, and it's this was before this, so this was in 2000, and I finished it in 2001. And so this was before like all the superhero craze. So like all of the women in the book they all have these trauma based superpowers, and so it was like at a time when I wrote it, it wasn't like like now I feel like everything is trauma based superpowers, and it's like
Yeah.
my book feels kind of, it makes me feel a little bit sad because like when I came out with it, everyone was like, "What the fuck have you done, girl? Like this is twisted. Like this is the only book that has no love in it. Like how does someone accomplish that?" And I was just like, well, if you knew even a little bit about my life, like it makes perfect sense actually. So, so at the time it was like that felt like a very transgressive thing to be doing. Is like, oh, this woman writing these like crazy superhero women and these zombie feminists and like, and yeah, and so I wrote that. That was my thesis, my senior thesis, and then years later, I decided to see if I could publish it. So I just went self-publishing route to begin with. And at that point, I kind of had already been known as a writer, but not necessarily fiction. So I had been working at the UN on a lot of, as a freelance reporter, covering Indigenous issues. So for all these different Indigenous delegates coming from all over the world to advocate for treaty rights, territory rights, basic human rights at the UN. I was covering all these meetings, and my reports were kind of getting sent out to these huge listservs with tens of thousands of people reading them around the world. And so a lot of my work, from when I wrote American Monsters to when I published it, was a lot more around human rights issues, Indigenous issues, race, racism, feminism, PTSD, because another thing that kind of shaped American Monsters was the murder of my best friend Wendy. And I witnessed it, and I mean, it was just honestly one of the most horrible things. And I had testified against the murderers, and that was a huge, that whole thing was just oh man, such a life shaping trauma. And it definitely shaped American Monsters a lot too. So I was writing a lot about PTSD and healing methods, and just kind of my journey, just trying to get better. Um, and so then yeah, so then I self-published American Monsters somewhere around 2009, I think. And really I self-published because at the time, again, no one was doing it. And so I was kind of like, I thought, you know what? This is the weirdest book. Nobody's going to pick it up. Like, and I knew that if I sent it to a publisher and if they were interested, they'd be like, we need you to rewrite the whole thing into like a more of a traditional narrative. And at the time I was very attached to the book, and I was attached to my trauma. Not to sound like Jamie Lee Curtis, like saying trauma, trauma over and over again, but like I really was yeah, I was trauma bonded to that book. And so I was like, I'm not publishing it any other way than how I have it. This is, what pain looks like when it comes out on a page. Like this is how it's going to be. And, it didn't do badly. Like, I mean, I actually had a lot of people bought it and people read it. And as women in particular really, really engaged with it very deeply. And then a few years later, an indie publisher was like, "Hey, we want to pick up your book, and we want to illustrate it." And so then in 2011, I got an artist, amazing watercolor artist named Rose Denise, who she lives in Turkey with her family, but she's American. And she did these incredible watercolor portraits and scenes from the book. And so, yeah, so that version that came out was, oh, it's so pretty. It's really, really pretty. So I was really proud of that. And and then, oh man, and then kind of the shit hit the fan when it came to a lot of things because at the time when my whole journey with American Monsters getting published, all took place in Prague. And kind of so what year was that? So 2011, my husband and I found out that our jobs had basically been made redundant at the school we worked at. And so we had kind of been planning to leave Prague already and didn't know quite what was going to happen. And we had a terrible little mistake, kind of like a 4-month layover in Germany that did not work out. And then by December of 2011, we were back in the US. And all of a sudden, I'd never wanted to come back to the US. Like, Florida is not my home. I would rather have gone back to California, honestly. Like, if I was going to live anywhere in the US, I'd rather go back there. But my husband's family was from here. We didn't really have much of a choice of like, we didn't have any money. We literally had 15 euros. Like, I still have the 15 euros. That was like the last cash that we had. Like, that was all we had left. And yeah, so we had to live with his parents for a while. And like, while I was there, I couldn't get a job. I couldn't find, I've always had my writing, but I've always had a job as well. And I couldn't find a job outside the house. Like, it just, transportation was either a block, or there was just nothing that was available that made it worthwhile to like take a taxi, because this is before Uber. So I was like, okay, well, I'm here now, and I've been working on like the sequel to American Monsters. Like, why don't I go back to that? And so I actually took the first 9 months that I was back in the States. I was doing I also do editing work with a lot of European universities. So that was my day job. And then I decided to pick up, the sequel to American Monsters. And I decided, instead of superheroes this time, I would frame it as like a supernatural noir, and like an urban fantasy kind of thing. And so it's
Yeah.
these two cops. These two cops are the main. And now I'm like, oh, why did I make them cops? Because, like, damn it, like, propaganda, it's like the insidiousness of the police state. It's like, this is me 10 years ago, not knowing any better. Um,
Hindsight is always, hindsight's definitely a thing.
it absolutely, especially when it comes to social justice issues. Like, I had not been in America, like, I had not lived here. So my experience with police, with like state violence, with all of that stuff, like, I mean, I, of course, was very aware of it, but I was like, the way that I wanted to frame the story, it was like all those cop shows. And I was watching a lot of cop shows, that was just, there's so many of them. And SVU was on TV all the time. And um, yeah, so the second novel came out. So I self-published that one as well. And I kind of had the mind to like start my own publishing house, but like without, if you don't have access to like capital, it's really difficult to do anything. So that kind of that didn't reach as far as I would have liked, and I feel like in a lot of ways it's better than the first one, just because it's like more measured and the writing is a lot calmer. And there's just something about that, the way that book came out, that I really loved. And I do have there's a third one. In fact, I was going to write a whole like series of these books. So then the third one was going to be all set in Prague, actually. So the first two are set in LA, and then the third one is going to be set in Prague, and that one's half finished. But then, it kind of got to a point where I needed work, and we were, living in a place where I couldn't find work outside the house. So I had to start like looking at like my resources from the computer. And that ended up being how I started actually writing for a living. So it really wasn't my choice for this to be like a full time, I don't recommend it. Like, for anyone who's listening who wants to be a writer, don't do this full time. Seriously, have something else, have another source of income, have something outside of the house, preferably, that you're doing that has nothing to do with anything you're interested in writing about. Because your brain, it needs that. It needs the difference. And you need to protect your creative space, like the creative areas in your brain. Like, you can't protect those if you're just, all you're doing is staring at a computer and like, I need to write another thing. I have to write another thing. I have to like just churning it out. Like, that's not good for creativity. But unfortunately, that's kind of what I had to do. And hey, don't get me wrong. Like, I have some amazing bylines. Like, I'm working with Entertainment Weekly at the moment. I've written for Teen Vogue. I've written for Huffington Post. Like, I used to be a regular horror contributor for Bitch magazine before they folded. I've worked with amazing editors, amazing people, but like, it's been hard. And now I have carpal tunnel, and that, because that's what will happen. Like, that's the other thing that'll happen, is if all you're doing is writing full time, you're gonna end up having health issues. You're gonna have brain issues. Like, it's just, yeah. So, I mean, for anyone who's like, I want to be a full-time writer, please don't. Just stop that. Like, just stop that. Very, very few professional writers can actually make a living. I'm not even making a living at the moment. Like, if my husband wasn't working full-time, and like, when we had that support, and I had that support, I wouldn't be able to do this. Like, it's not, what's the word? It's not reasonable, really, to try to think that this would be something that you should do full time. I mean, unless you're a nepotism Barbie. they can do anything they want because they've got money. So like, so I mean, if you're an Eptis Barbie watching this, then man, donate your money to writers. That's what I would say to the so that we can like do stuff that we want. Because yeah, man, like a universal income, how much what that would do for writers would be incredible.
I mean, yeah, you're preaching to the choir of me and Monocle always have had our day jobs and we write in the creative space. And like, I think the problem is an industry problem at this point, as you said, because reasonable is the word. You know, you're like, how do I describe this? It's not reasonable. And I think there are so few sites that can actually pay people what they deserve, and actually pay them livable wages, because I've had to forego multiple like editors that I adore. You know, like I love the people who've come to me and have been like, hey, what would it take to get you writing full time for us? And, you know, the answer is always, do you know how much I make in my day job? Because here it is. And that very much closes the door on those conversations. And it's just where we are, you know, like it's a creative industry. And I think business minded people look at that and say, oh, cool, it's a creative industry, so I can get away with paying people less because they just want to do it because they're creatives and all that stuff. So there's a lot that has to change there. I think we do absolutely have to like start looking at the sites that do actually value their employees and do actually pay them what they deserve, and more have to do that. But the problem is most don't have to.
Yeah, and then this other thing is that there's so many people who are just so excited to get a byline that they'll, for $50 write something 6,000 words. I saw someplace that was paying like for 4,000 words they were paying $50. 4,000 words. I'm like, what? I oh pff, what in what scenario is that okay? Like how? And this is a very popular, and I don't want to like name and shame, but it's a very popular site. And I was like, I've stopped clicking on them honestly because I'm like, nope, that is exploitation. That is full creative exploitation. Like, how can you do that to people? Because here's the other thing for writers, like, I don't know how many, have you guys seen Lisi's story or read the book?
I'm like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. I've read it.
Okay, so in Lisi's story, so it's this, it's my favorite Stephen King book, and then the adaptation that they made of it is so beautiful. Oh my God, it's incredible. So there's this writer named Scott, and he's got this place that he goes, and it's these kind of magical healing waters, and that's where he gets his ideas from, and that's where he, whenever he's having troubles, like he's got a lot of PTSD issues as well, and he goes there, and that's like his space where he centers, and then when he comes back he's got the most beautiful things to write. Like writers, we all have that too. Like every single writer, any creative person has that well of creativity. But the thing is that if that well, like if you use it up without all the things that fill it back up again, like at a certain point, that's when burnout happens. And you know what? It is really hard to fill that well when it goes dry. Like it is really hard. And I've been there. I've literally, I've been in that situation with like having, because I had a bunch of content writing jobs that I needed to do for the money. And, when you're churning out like 3,000 word articles a week, and it's like, okay, well, this is great. It's fun writing about Dexter and American Horror Story and stuff. But like, this isn't the only thing that I want to write about. And I would really notice in my brain, like that I wasn't able to think about other things. I wasn't able to think about short stories. I wasn't able to think about, even just quietly working on my third novel. Like I just couldn't, because the well had run dry. Like I tapped it out, and it was really a scary few months as I had to like reconfigure, like where is this energy going to come from? And honestly, it took getting injured. That's really what it took, is for my hand injuries to come up, and I was forced. I couldn't work for 6 months, and all I could do was like sit, and I had just sit in pain and waiting, and just like waiting for just the inflammation in my hands to go down, getting steroids, so many steroid shots, physiotherapy, like I mean the whole thing. And it was kind of during that convalescence time, like that's when my Blair Witch article, like that's where that came from, was like me sitting there like watching each of the Blair Witch movies like kind of on repeat for a while, and I was like, wait a minute, I I think I just noticed something, Steve. Like, because if you watch something enough times, you'll start to see really weird shit. So, like, so there was that, and like my Keanu book, So Much Ado About Keanu. That book also came from that convalescence time, and I literally, with two fingers on my phone on the notes app, making my outline and like tears streaming down my face because my hands hurt so much. But I was just like, I have to write something, and I think this is a really good idea. Like, you know. And same with the Bill and Ted book, like that. All that stuff came because I was so burned out and my body had shut down. You know, my hands had shut down. I couldn't create. I couldn't. I'm a hand talker, and so like if my hands are in braces, I will start stuttering and stuff because like I need it comes out of my hands, and like my writing comes out of my hands too. It doesn't come out of my mouth. And so I just needed that time, I guess, to rest. But it sucked because I like all my savings were gone after that, right? Because it's America. So I just try to focus these days. I'm just trying to focus like, all right, let's just focus on the positive that came out of it. Because if it hadn't been for those 6 months of convalescence, then I wouldn't be doing all the cool, amazing things I'm doing now. And I also wouldn't be getting paid more for writing less words. So, you know, so that's the other thing was like, I'm finally at a point where, you know, after all of this, after everything, you know, dabbling in so many different aspects of the publishing industry and working with so many different people, where I'm just finally at a point in my career where I'm like, okay, well, I don't take less than like 16 cents a word, like, or that's my minimum now. It's like, and a lot of the places I'm writing for now pay much more than that. So I just feel like, but like the basic for most people is like a cent if you're lucky. But most of the time it's not even that. It's like less than pennies, right? So yeah, so it's been a very strange and wild kind of journey through publishing. And you know, if I wasn't still in Florida, I definitely would have a day job. Like, I mean, the places that I would like to live are places that are just much more community based, whereas Florida, it's just where I am. This is Trump land, you know, and it's very like I don't know, it's getting worse every day, and every time I go out, I feel unsafe. It feels unsafe to be a person of color and someone who just visibly looks different. Oh my God, the looks I get from people all the time is awful. So, you know, it's just, yeah, with everything that's going on, like I'm really looking forward to at some point having money in the bank again and being able to move someplace where like I will work outside the house. And like that's like my dream right now. So like people are dreaming about being a full-time writer, and I'm a full-time writer who's dreaming about the day that I'll have a part-time job working with kids or like in a
Yeah.
tattoo parlor or an art gallery. I don't care. Like someplace else outside, like where I see people every day. Like that's my dream now. Is that weird? Like,
No, that makes complete sense. And you know, oh man, we could talk about the writer thing and the career thing for another 30 minutes if we wanted to. But
yeah,
you kind of hit on, I think, a really interesting and natural segue into talking about the film, which is the pressures of creativity, the tortures of creativity, and the things that you force yourself to do in order to put yourself into a creative mindset. So I'm going to say, let's take this natural transition. Let's take a quick break, and then let's come back and talk about Don't Go in the Woods. So we'll be back in just a second.
Congratulations! Not only have you made it halfway through this latest episode of Certified Forgotten, but we have a fresh new batch of bumpers provided by our patrons that I'm going to read out loud right now. First up, we have a bumper from Amanda, and Amanda says, well, Amanda wants you to feel yourself up. Early detection of breast cancer can be the difference between a 99% survival rate and a 27% survival rate. Monthly self-exams are a quick way to prioritize your health. For more info, go to knowyourlemons.org or follow Amanda at AmandaHagley on Instagram for reminders. Next up, we have a movie recommendation from Mr. James Shapiro, who says, very plainly, can't wait for everyone to see Talk to Me, it's so good. Yes, I cannot wait to see Talk to Me either, Mr. Shapiro. Save me a seat at South by Southwest. Alright, I don't have Monocle here, so this was short and sweet. Let's get back to the episode.
Okay, welcome back. So this week on Certified Forgotten, we're going to talk about a 2010 horror film conceived and directed by Vincent D'Onofrio. The name of the film is Don't Go in the Woods, and here is a basic plot description that isn't really going to do this horror musical any justice, but we got to describe the plot anyway, so here we go. When the members of a Brooklyn band get the opportunity to produce a demo tape, their lead singer and songwriter convinces them to head deep into the woods to write new music. But their newfound focus dissolves when the band is joined by a group of their fans, several of whom have designs on the band members themselves. When a mysterious man starts killing off the groupies, they declare themselves groupies, so it's okay to use that word. The band may soon learn that their first album is also their last. With songs by Sam Bisbee, and Vincent D'Onofrio taking a Law and Order break to make the slasher of his dreams, Don't Go in the Woods took 12 days to shoot, cost about $100,000, features a completely non-professional cast of actors, and is, without a doubt, one of the most unique and strange horror films that I have ever seen. So I want to start tangentially, actually, because this is a question that was bothering me the entire time that I was watching the film. So I'm going to start for both of you in a different place, which is we're about, 10, 15 years out from 2010 now. The 2000s are starting to become a window, a look back in nostalgia. We're a few years away from fashion and music to kind of cycle back through. What is the sound of the 2000s to you? Because I was listening to the songs in the soundtrack and I was like, this sounds very 2000s. And then I was trying to figure out what that meant to me. So I'm curious, what makes this a time capsule musically? What are the artists that this evoked for you? What are the people that you thought of when you were listening to these bands?
Yeah, that's because I think I mentioned that in my piece as well, that there's definitely a time capsule feel about it. And I just feel like it's that like really that emotional indie rock scene with like the angst on display, but like very earnest. I feel at this point, I feel like it's shifted into there's a kind of a cynicism now. But I feel like back in 2010, there was just this, I don't know, I guess you would call them hipsters. I guess would they have called them hipsters back then? I wasn't in America when that came out, so I'm not sure what the lingo was, but
I think
there,
hipsters were born from this era. I think like this is kind of like the era that launched the concept of the hipster in pop culture. Yeah.
right. And but the hipster is the hipster is the cynical one. The hipster is like doing things to be ironic. They're like, oh, it's like that whole vibe does not feel like the vibe of Don't Go in the Woods to me. Like to me, it feels like that's the moment that it shifted. And I feel like that's also really interesting in the film because how the film ends with this guy like murdering everyone and stealing all the music, like that's the intro of the hipster. Like he becomes the proto hipster like archetype right there. Like in that transition from being a band member to the one who wants to be like the solo artist and the star, right? Like I feel like a lot of the music in Don't Go in the Woods is like it's that music that you'll hear at the cafe down the street. Like it's never going to be on the radio, but you're going to hear and you're going to love it. Like if that's your favorite band and you're like, "Oh my gosh, you got to play that one." Like and if they know you, they know which one your song is, and like every time that you hear it, it's like there's something lovely about that. And there were just like, I mean, I know for me, like, even though I wasn't in the States, like for the 2000s, I used to go to live music, like indie local musicians all the time. I mean, that
Mhm.
was just like, I mean, that's always been one of my favorite things to do. But living in Europe where you can just like walk to a little concert or there's concerts in the park or like, and everything is in walking distance or there's public transport, like just the amount of like just really talented musicians that I had opportunity to just spend time with and be fans of and then turn into friends. Like that's the vibe I feel like. I think that's one of the reasons I love the movie so much is, and bringing all the fans into it, all the groupies. Um, I don't know. It just, to me, it is nostalgia. It is nostalgia for me for the 2000s. And the switch that happens at the end is like, it just, at the time you didn't realize it, but like it kind of foreshadowed a lot of how the indie rock scene changed. And I don't think that you can make a movie like that now. Like I feel like the earnestness, it would just, well, I mean, I feel like it was lost on people back then. I think it's kind of been lost on, yeah. I mean, yeah, because we're reviewing it and like that less than 10 reviews, which is just makes me so sad. But I feel like maybe by the time the movie came out, people's minds and hearts had already moved into that hipster mind frame. And
Mm.
so the movie didn't resonate. And when I saw it, I was really missing that. all of that vibe that I used to just like drown myself in and when I was in Europe. Um and I think maybe that's why I just love the music so much. Like my husband even knows the lyrics to all the songs because that's how much I've watched it. Like it's it's really funny. Like every once in a while I'll hear him humming and I'm like, "Oh my god, he's literally singing the hurricane song from Don't Go in the Woods right now."
Yeah.
Well, and that's, trying to again put a sound on it, I guess, monocle, to answer your question, and trying to like, contextualize that time in music. It does feel incredibly indie. It does feel like you are with your friends around a campfire, just kind of making music like
Yeah.
that. And it, like, weirdly enough, I know this isn't really from the 2000s era, but it made me think of movies like Uncle Peckerhead and Dinner in America, because those were two punk based horror films, and like they do the songs very well, and they're very
Right.
Sezin, as you said, like very emotional. These felt like the songs aren't just about like, let's just go be punks and do blah 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 blah, like the generic stuff. Like, no, they're heartfelt punk songs. And what the music here does very well. And another strange comparison point, but I will bring it up because Glee was very popular at the time when this came out. It very much felt like a punk version of Glee, in the sense that, you get the traditional, you get the stereotypes, you get all that stuff, but then all of a sudden they kind of just go a different way, and they kind of analyze like
Yeah.
what's behind all of that, and they analyze all the punk guys who are these, macho bros, and talking about drinking and fucking and all that stuff. But then when it's their turn to sing their song, it is this thing that is, the guy with the broken heart, or the blind guy who just, is singing about death, and like he doesn't care that he doesn't see anything. And that to me is the stuff that it feels very 2000s, in that it's open and honest and raw. And even though like in the 2000s for me, I was listening to like Saliva and POD and like new metal, like
Yeah.
that was the sound of the 2000s for me, was like Hellraiser, Hellworld, all these like, Korn wannabes and stuff like that. So that was my 2000 soundscape.
Wow. Gosh, that's wild. And honestly, that's why I wish that there were really more horror musicals because I feel like just the intersection with the music and the horror, like, because when I was reading, D'Onofrio didn't do many interviews about it, but one that he did, he talked about how the challenge that he felt was with this that songs are emotional release. So then, how do you have them singing, and then have the violence be the emotional release, right? Like, how do you cut that in a way? And I feel like the way that each song is interrupted, like he just did that so perfectly. And it's just like every song is unfinished, right? Like we don't, and literally those songs are not finished. Like that's all that exists of them. There's no soundtrack for this movie. There's no score. There's some people who've made like fan cuts on YouTube with all the songs together. But even then, the songs are not complete because we don't have a complete recording. I don't know if Bisbee even did a complete recording of them. Like I wish he would. And then Sam Bisbee himself. So some of the songs are covers. So I've gone through all of his albums trying to find all the songs, and they're very different. He's got a very different style than anyone who's in the movie, which is also pretty cool. Um, but there's only like five, like what? No, four. There's only like four songs that are actually from the movie that are on any of his albums. So everything else was just written for the film. And yeah, and there's like something, I feel like there's something about that, like when that those unfinished moments that also just makes it such a poignant film for me because all these kids, like, like they didn't even want to be famous. Just Nick is the only one who wants to be famous. Everyone else just
Mhm.
wants to play music, get laid, have fun, like, sing their hearts out. And that's more than enough for them, right? Like, it's more than enough. And then there's Nick over here, like Mr. Frodo lookalike, who's like, I want to do this. I'm climb the mountain on my own. Like, oh, I'm taking all your shit with me. It's like, what the hell, dude? Like, what's that man's problem? I sit and I'm like, he's a character, I realize, but like, I'll sit and I'll be like, this motherfucker over here, like but
Yeah.
but at the same time, I feel like his sequel, he'll be in jail. Like he's not going to get away with that. He's not. There's no way. So he'll get his album and it'll hit platinum or whatever, and maybe it'll get more famous after he's in prison. But like he's going to jail. He's not going to get away with that. Oh, I want a sequel so badly. I really do.
It is interesting how much this film talking about the time capsule piece, this is maybe the most horror film the most I've ever seen a horror film belong to a specific era in which it was released. And by that I mean, like, talking about the music, the vibe that I got while listening to this was like pure Scrubs soundtrack all the way, right? Like every single song on the soundtrack, if it was like, I was thinking like Rhett Miller and the old 97s pretty much the whole time. If all of these were like credit songs on a Scrubs soundtrack, I'd be like, feels totally of a piece, feels totally appropriate. But I was trying to remember, and so I ended up looking it up, when Ty West and the Mumblegore movement started, because House of the Devil's 2009, The Innkeepers is 2011. Ty West was sort of the horror counterpart to a lot of what was happening in Austin with like the mumblecore movement, and it just feels like a film that you to say that it couldn't get made today makes it sound like there were some sort, well, it couldn't get made today because it's a cast of non-professional actors and it's a horror musical, and like, who makes those? But it also feels like it was tapping into a very specific energy that only, like, within the film industry, was only active for a few year window here, right? Where like people were making movies like this, and they were doing it with like non-professional, like lightly scripted storytelling kind of stuff, whether that was mumblecore or mumblegore, right? Like it was a very late 2000s, early 2010s kind of energy. And it's interesting to see that somebody who we don't think of as at all like part of this DIY indie scene, somebody like Vincent D'Onofrio, who was like Law and Order money and has been in blockbusters, and is very overtly stated New York State. Like he was tapping into that same kind of thing too, a coast or a country away. It is a fascinating. To me, it's almost like an architectural dig, right? When like you find a piece of architecture or artwork that's like 1,000 miles away from where it should be, and you're just like, what is the deal with this?
Yes. Oh my gosh, that puts it in such a different perspective too, because I didn't even think about that, because again, I was when I for most of that decade I was abroad. So like seeing Don't Go in the Woods was kind of one of the first movies I saw when I came back. And it's still so, like, for me the experience of watching it reminded me of being in Europe, but like now that you're bringing up like all the contemporaries, because I never even thought about it in that context. Honestly, I never. Oh, that's so cool. Man, that's really cool. And now that you've pointed it out, it feels like there is that, like, because I've always thought it kind of stands by itself in a lot of ways, but now that you mentioned contemporaries, I'm like, oh my gosh, it is actually part. There is a web that connects it to other things. Oh, it's just a shame that like more people didn't like it.
I mean, that's, listen, I'm gonna out myself and 100% say that I saw it on release, and I was one of the negative reviews. It's just where it was, but like that's why I kind of was excited to watch it and talk about this movie, because I'd seen it already, but I saw it again when it came out almost a decade ago. And it was still a lot fresher, as, let's say, like in my horror journey, in my writing journey. So like I was little Donato. I was not who I am now, and I wanted to recontextualize it after having seen so many more horror musicals. Musicals are one of my favorite subgenres at this point. And I just came into this movie with a lot more context and experience, I guess I would say. So watching it was really fun because I do like it more now. Like I absolutely do appreciate it more. And I appreciate the music. Like the soundtrack is phenomenal. Just like up and down. Like it's almost like a musical that isn't traditional in the way the Sezin, like you already said, that like the songs cut off. There's no clear ending. It's, these songs are meant not only to be musically beautiful and like, carry a soundtrack and stuff like that, but they are telling the story. And so it's so much more impactful when these two, plucky like girls are singing French, words as like, jumping around, like they're just having fun. It's this fun up tempo song, and then like the sledgehammer comes out of nowhere, or one gets dragged away. So it feels like, the music is here, but the music is just a facade, and yet that is why you're here, and it's a huge reason why. I guess the one thing for me, and listen, I like it more this time. I enjoyed watching it through, and again, we love like a 90-minute horror musical that is part slasher, part really good music. It's just a little hard for me because all the respect in the world for casting musicians and all the respect in the world for getting that part right, but some of those performances are rough.
I almost like to think of it in a way as found footage.
Yeah.
Like it's not a found footage, but like that's kind of it's got that vibe for me as well because they're just so natural
Mhm.
and I like that about it. It's like they're just natural. And so like why does everyone have to always be camera ready? And especially when you're bringing well what you're bringing is not the acting performance, it's the musical performance, right? Like you could have got any great actor to come in and like that and then everyone would be like, "Oh my god, the acting in that was so amazing." But like the singing, oh. But like this isn't a movie about the acting. This was a movie about the songs, right? So like I feel like having the singers that was really like Mr. Donofrio's that was such a good call on his part. And I mean, all of them are what I like as well. Like, okay, so they're not that great actors, but they're also interesting to look at. Every one of them has such a unique face, really like, and with that silly hair that all the boys had back then, which actually my hair looks a little bit like it right now, but I have like the gay side shave, so it's different. Um, but they all just have such interesting faces, and I find that even though some of the performances and the delivery of lines is not perfect, there's something so charming about it. And again, I think it's just that earnestness that they all have, where like it's so rare in a horror movie to feel that kind of earnestness. I feel because that's not what horror movies are usually about, are they? Like we're not going in there for like these really emotional songs being sung by dudes who are like like punching each other when they're in a group, but then as soon as they start singing it's like, oh my goodness, like their hearts are so tender. um yeah, it just in so many ways it just defies expectations, and the fact that they're not good actors I feel like is also an expectation that gets defied, and I think it just this is a case where it just for me it really works.
I want to give Vincent an opportunity to talk about this in his own words because he actually addressed this in a Huffington Post interview he did in 2010. And it goes strictly to the point that both of you have made about the quality of the actors. The idea was to write a B. This is him in the interview. The idea was to write a B movie horror structure, and I thought it would be really cool to put non-actors' performances in it against these really kind of cool pop songs. And the contrast of that, the flat kind of acting against the musical aspect, like something you're not quite sure of. And then on top of it, I threw in the cerebral leading guy so that it creates a cerebral tone to the film, making it seem deeper than it is. It was all a guise to make it pure entertainment. So he's consciously playing with those. And I'm with Donato. I'm not sure it all works all the time, but there's an intentionality in flat performances and good music and all of these things. He's consciously playing with genre and modes and tones, literal and metaphorical, throughout the film. This is him at his most playful, trying to make something that kind of works in a couple of those different modes that he talks about.
Oh, I wish he would make more. Like, I mean, even if he doesn't do a follow up to this, like, wouldn't it be cool if he did a whole series of horror musicals and each of them was just like, whatever other vision he would want to bring to it. Like maybe next time he would have better actors and then the songs, like I don't know. So I want him to make more movies, like
Yeah.
not where he's in a cop. Like, and did you guys catch his cameo at the beginning that he's singing that weird Jesus song in the beginning? Oh my god.
I was gonna say, like, when I rewatched it this time and I heard the voice immediately, I'm like, that's him, right? I'm like, that's him singing the Jesus song to begin. It's just so cool though, because again, like, you don't think you look at Vincent D'Onofrio and you don't immediately go, oh yeah, that's the kind of guy that would direct a horror musical. Like that guy's definitely got a horror musical in him that it is also like it's like soft and tender, but it's also incredibly gory. Um, eh, yeah, it's just one of those oddball things, but I think it's also like going back to what you've been saying before, Sezin, like I wish we just had more horror musicals like this one, especially
Mm.
because just the way it flows through and the way that the songs do tell the entire story. Like it's not even just bits and pieces. Like the groupies, I don't want to shut them out because I think they all do a wonderful job singing their songs as well. And I think actually some of my favorite, choruses and the things that are playing back in my head right now, it's mostly the women in the film, and that's not to shut out the band. I think the band is great too. But you have the quote unquote groupies who are just supposed to be there as fodder or just like, a distraction to the guys. And they're the ones I actually think more of when the musical elements come back. And I'm just like that chanting, sorry, not chanting, but the enchanting way that they'll be walking through the woods. Like it's dark out and she's just got the one lantern and she's like ominously singing while walking through. It's such a, everything put together in that little bite of movie right there. Like it just is so eerie and so encapsulating. I don't know. It does a lot for me. Like that really was when the movie like stood out, and I was like, oh man, like maybe I was too harsh on this, like for the acting element, because again, intentionality goes a huge way, and I'm gonna mimic what Monagle said, and I don't think it works all the time. I think it does kind of work against the film in certain moments, but D'Onofrio did what he wanted to do, and that's the commitment there. Is at least you're a filmmaker with conviction, and you're trying something different. So I'm in on that, you know.
I want to jump on that really quickly, Donato, because I think you're right. Like those are my favorite scenes in the film, and there is I've been scrambling around it all day trying to find what my angle on it is, and I haven't quite figured out. It hasn't quite locked into place for me. But there is something about the way that he moves between a musical and a concert film as a filmmaker. And the concert film pieces are really fun and really good. And it's people performing their music. And like these are songs that we don't aspire a lot of interior, or we don't apply a lot of interiority to, right? Like these are they're writing songs that to a certain extent that they think sound deep a little bit. And so they're singing their songs, and like the moment that goes away, they're just like, fuck yeah, hand me another beer. And so like there's a bit of a transitional piece. It's a bit of a performative element to that. But then each of the times that the girlfriends, the groupies, the friends that come out and visit them, each of the times they're singing a musical, non-diegetic version of the song that was just performed. They're singing it to the camera. They're adapting the lyrics to meet their own moods and the own moments that they're in. And all of that, like, it goes from a concert film to a classic musical. And a lot of some of the artifice that we see in some of the other songs slips away. And it's them being genuine, and it's them being authentic, and the lyrics hit harder, and the music hits harder, and the arrangements are a lot more juiced than they are kind of like the stripped away band. Those little pivots from concert film to musical that happen multiple times throughout the film, I was never not fascinated about it. I just think it's like one of the most cool things I've seen happen in a musical.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, my God, that song, the Turn the Light On song, wow. The way that it goes from the dude singing it to her singing it, I mean, just chills thinking about it. Just absolutely, yeah. I love the women in this. I love everyone in this except for Nick, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
but I mean, really, but I just find that, yeah, gosh, that's such a, I love this movie. But that's just a really cool thing that I actually didn't notice, that like the girls, when they sing, that they're the musical, and that the boys are not, that the boys are doing the concert. Like, wow, look, I've literally seen this movie 100 times, and that's not something I noticed. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to watch it again tonight and really pay attention.
99% of the time, my best thoughts about the movies that we talk about on the podcast come up in the middle of the podcast. Like these are not that was not a thought that I had written down. I was like, I'm going to work in. That was y'all talking about it, and I was like, oh, I remembered that, or that I. So yeah, like this is what if you haven't had an opportunity to do a classroom film kind of thing, not to preach, but this is the kind of thing I miss, where like somebody says something and then you yes and suddenly like your observations are just like going through the roof because everybody's feeding off each other's energy. So 100% don't feel bad about not catching that before. I wouldn't have got it if you'd said the smart thing and Donato had said the smart thing.
Oh, dude, that's so cool. That is so cool. I mean, and again, that's there's just so much there. It's like not even 90 minutes. I think it's like 85 minutes.
Yeah.
Dude, how do you put that much? And then there's people out here making 3.5 hour movies, and they don't even give you a break in the movie theater. And I'm like, do you need all that time really? Like, seriously? And then you complain that we don't want to go to see it in the cinema because it's 3.5 hours long. Like, honestly, I don't know. These days I'm the brevity really appeals to me. And I just find the art of it, of how do you get so much into that short amount of time. And I feel like a lot of the filmmakers that are making movies that are over 2 hours long really should just take a break and make a 90-minute film, like, or shorter. Make it 80 minutes. Let's just really hit us with a really strong 80-minute movie. And I bet so many of the movies that are coming out now would just be so much better. Like, I really like, why does everything, it doesn't need to be that long. And I mean, this film is such a great example. I mean, my God, now I'm really thinking about the non-diegetic music, and I'm like, dude, he sat there and he put that in there, and I've seen the film 150 times at least. And what an incredible detail to have worked in. And then now that I'm thinking about it, the way that, the contrast that it makes, like in 85 minutes, like, dude, These people who are making 3 hour long movies, they aren't even doing anything remotely close to just that one thing that Matt just pointed out. Like, seriously, think about it.
Oh, I do often. I half of my awards reviews this season have just been like, yeah, all right, interesting, but like, did we need to pad this movie with an extra hour of fluff here? Like, no. And going back to like one more thing, maybe about the overall structure. I do want to bring up the slasher aspect because we are talking about a horror musical, and we are honing in on the music, and we can all say we love it. But there is a slasher element here, and there is like, you know, a man in the woods element. We know they're being stalked. We know that the bandmates are going to start dying one by one, and the groupies as well. And I guess I forgot kind of how mean this movie was in a way, and I'm not saying that as a positive or a negative. I think it's just a very this stoning death of the blind guy. You know, this man who's just standing there in the woods, and he can't see anything, and so instead of mercifully killing this person quickly, no, like he just starts chucking rocks at him, and it brought me right back to like Speak No Evil, which came out last year and was a phenomenal little horror film. But you know, if you're getting that comparison for me, that is a testament to the meanness, and that just adds one more contrasting element to this whole experience that I would describe as, you know, Amelia watched it with me, and like she's just like, this is my kind of weird. And I think that word weird is really what sticks here, because it's a mean ass slasher. It's an open book musical. It's all these things. But to now throw it your way, both of you, I mean, how does the slasher element play for you? Because I have thoughts on the ending. I have thoughts on how the killer is shown and the way they try to mesh that together. But like, what about you? Like, did the slasher pull off?
Oh, I mean, so slashers, like, I mean, slashers used to be my favorite genre until I kind of started getting into Fey horror. So for me, like and musicals are also my favorite. So like a slasher musical is to me the perfect balance somehow. But like what you were saying about the killings being so mean, I mean, my God, like when has a slasher killer ever left so many people half dead? Like, because it wasn't just, it wasn't just Robbie. Robbie is the one who gets stoned. Oh my gosh, that scene makes me cry every time. But Anton, he's alive and he's got his instrument stuck in his throat. Like he just left him tied up to a tree with like, and he's still breathing. And like, I mean, that killer is sadistic. Like in some ways, I almost feel like we can't even call him a slasher because he leaves so many people like alive. And most slasher killers, they kind of get the job done. That's kind of the point of them, is that like they keep slashing until the person is dead, whereas this guy's out here just literally leaving people and they're going to die slowly. I mean, how much does he hate his friends? And that's the thing about him as a slasher killer. Like he's so much worse, I feel, than like your Michael Myers or your Jason Voorhees, because this is personal. Like he is murdering these people in very personal ways, and slashers don't usually do that. They're just like, oh, there's a hammer right here, I'm going to use this to club you with. Oh, there's a sleeping bag here, I'm going to suffocate you and set you on fire. Like, you know what I mean? Like the killings are what's the word for, like, when they're not exactly planned. It's just like the slasher is just here to kill everyone that they possibly can. But this guy's out there stalking them and then leaving some of them alive to die slowly so he can steal their songs before. Like, oh, I mean, there's a level of that takes this to another level than a slasher in a lot of ways for me. And it's so gruesome. Like, it's so gruesome. It's so sick what he does. And I'm trying to think of another movie where, like, another slasher where you have a killer like this, and I'm kind of coming up blank on it. I'm sure after we finish talking, I'll think of like 5 examples.
Well, I mean,
But
like, think about Scream. I mean, that is, you know,
Scream, yes,
murder and
yeah,
friends.
yes, yes. Well, but they make sure that everyone's dead though. Like they're
That is
pretty
true.
thorough.
Although I do have to say, as mean and nasty as this film is, the melodica moment is fucking hilarious. And him breathing through the melodica, even I know he's dying and it's his dying breath, but just hearing the melodica that's stuck into his throat play as he's breathing, A plus.
Oh
That's art. That's art.
God.
I feel bad because Sezin, you just talked about like the impact of all of these murders, and the only thing I can say to answer Donato's question is we finally found something that can compete against the sleeping bag murders of Jason X. That's it. They're like, this is in the ballpark. This. If you were making a list, If some crazy SEO person was like, give me a list of the 10 best sleeping bag kills in cinema history, I'd be like, all right, Jason X is number one. It's not a question, but Don't Go in the Woods. It's got to be somewhere in the top three.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Just, I mean, just the fact it's just how personal. I don't really like. Well, other than Scream, a lot of these slasher films are just they're defined by this monster, that's there. And I love how D'Onofrio he really plays on that because you see this hulking figure running around in the woods, and it's like, ooh, this is a normal slasher movie. But then when like the motives and everything come out, and you find out what's happening, and this absolute psychopath that has just been living among a bunch of really nice, talented people, um, that all of a sudden it's like, oh, what? Wait. So there was but wait, but he's leaving. Wait, and then he's stoning. Like, wait, what? Like, oh my god, and I just feel like again how how personal the kills are. Like he could have let the blind guy live. Robbie could have lived because he couldn't identify anybody. He wouldn't have known anything that was going on. He really could have left him. And the fact that he killed him in such a calculated and horrifying way as that slowly, um, again, it makes me almost think like that this is something, it's like a slasher something else. Like, and I've been trying to
Yeah.
think of what like what the adjacent word would be to kind of like really give it an accurate label, because I actually want more stories like that with like slashers who are not quite slashers exactly by the definition of the Voorhees or the Myers and all that. Um, yeah, which is just another thing that makes this movie really special for me, in terms of how it's been put together, and the character motivations. Because most slashers don't really have that. Like other than Scream, like you said, they don't really have much motivation. It's just like how many people can we kill in 90 minutes or 2.5 hours?
Yeah, and I mean, think of Tragedy Girls in a way too. Like Tragedy Girls is literally two slashers who are killing people they know and doing it for popularity and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of connections to be made between those films because this is I the Menu comes to mind as I don't like I'm watching Don't Go Into the Woods and all of a sudden I'm like, is this the indie horror version of the Menu in the sense that like that we have a creative push to his fullest potential in the bloodiest way possible. And it's a little sicker here because at least the Menu is Chef Slowick is killing himself at the end of it because that's the whole point of it is we all die. None of us are worth the art that we're making. We're all dead. But here we have a musician who's like, nah, everyone else has to die so that I can become famous, and that is everything. And I think there's something so interesting in the final moments of Don't Go Into the Woods because this whole time we're seeing a slasher. Sezin, as you've been saying, it's a non-traditional slasher because we have the Man in Black, but it turns out that this Man in Black, kind of looking like Abe Lincoln running through the woods at points, is just it's our musician. It's our villain musician this whole time. And we're seeing this so that obviously there is suspense and that there is a mystery around who is picking these people off. Then we find out, and we have the musician confront his alter ego, let's say, and like even kill him. And there's so much in that little motion where, again, I don't know if it works fully because you have the moment of them standing over a river and, he knocks his imaginary version into the water and disappears and all this stuff. So, like, I feel like they're trying to say so many things and I don't know if they all land, but it is such an interesting moment and curious moment because you're like, oh god, like he's even like murdering the part of himself that I don't know, maybe was doing all this, and maybe this is like a split moment where him killing the Man in Black means he might be seeing the folly of his ways, but instead he just takes the tape and goes gets famous, and it's like, oh no, he's pure evil.
But the killer version of him really liked his last song. So the only reason he stopped and put down the sledgehammer was to listen to the music. So,
There you go.
music soothes the savage beast.
Oh my god!
Or
Wow.
or enables. I don't really,
Yeah,
again,
soothes,
murky on the
enables,
message.
yeah.
Yeah, one of those two. It's either like gets rid of it or doubles him in power. I don't know.
Well, see, because that was kind of my thought was that he kills this version of himself that you think is the slasher, but he's really the slasher. It's him. So this thing that's been there, it's been this kind of like, yeah, like you said, like a split moment. But um he's always been that person. He's always been a psychopath. And I almost feel like the fight with the man in black is almost, well, first off, I feel like it's maybe a little bit of a nod to Men in Black. Just right, just like a really dorky thing. Um, but also it, like he's tried to convince himself that it's this other thing inside him that's making him do all this violence, but really it's just him. And that's him realizing like, okay, these are the lengths I actually will go to. And you know what? I don't need this guy anymore. Now I'm just going to own it. And I'm going to take the songs with me. And what else would he do before he gets caught? You know, like I really think about that. I really think about that a lot. Like how much more damage is this white dude going to do to other people around him? Like before they finally find out what he's done, but he's still going to be famous. And then that's also like the thing as well at the end is that he's going to be famous regardless. So whether he's going to be famous because he's talented or famous because he's like Dahmer, it doesn't matter to him, right? He just wants to be famous. So I feel like there's a really, such a sly commentary on the dark side of creativity in this. And like, how many people really go that far to get that fame? And then what's the fame for, you know?
That's what I want to see in a sequel. Like that to me, that's the interesting part. Where if it's never going to happen, but like if it did happen and a sequel of this movie came out, seeing how this now evil musician who is gaining his fame by sacrificing his friends navigates the music industry, and now he's reached to where he wants to get to, but he's going to have to keep doing more to stay there, and he's going to have to keep eating to survive. Let's say, he has to sustain that hunger somehow. So like everything you're saying is the stuff I would actually love to see in a sequel, where it's like, does he get busted doing this? Is he so good at it that he just starts murdering agents and other things? Like that's
Because he did murder his agent. Remember, he murders his agent in this one already. So, um, yeah, like who else? Who else is gonna be in the line before? Oh gosh, but maybe we should just write it and like
let's do it. Send it to D'Onofrio. Be like, hey, here's a script. Go film this in 12 more days.
I mean, I why not? Like I was hoping he would take me up on my offer to chat with me about the movie because I'm really curious to hear about like how my interpretation of a lot of things kind of meshed with what his intentions were. Um, but like I honestly I really do sit and I think about sequels to this movie a lot. And do people still do treatments when it comes to writing a script, or do you just write the script now?
I think people probably do treatments. I would assume as much, but I mean, it is more, a Wild West, I'd say, in the indie scene, where I think you can kind of just do
Yeah.
whatever you want. Like, like I think just open doors now, or just getting a product
Yeah.
out and being like, do I make a movie, go to a festival and get distro, or do I write a script and write a spec and bring it to somebody else to get made and find producers? There's no answer anymore because we've seen success stories across the board.
Well, let me. This is the last question we always ask our guests, and I feel like we're here now. So I want to ask this question right now, which is, we're talking about sequels. Who knows? Probably not ever, right? Of course. But point being, this film, I think we all agree, varying degrees of liking it, varying degrees of deciding that it really works, but we all agree that there's something here. So the last question we ask our guests, Sezin, and you can take first crack at this, is how does this film get in front of a bigger audience, an audience it deserves? What is the thing that this movie needs in order to maybe be part of the next great canon of indie horror or mumblecore or horror musicals or like movies made by Law and Order actors, right? Wherever this canon is going to be, like, what is the thing it needs to do in order to get there?
I mean, I think the first thing would be to like maybe have some fresh screenings of it, because it really had a very limited run in theater. And I think, oh my God, I would have loved to have seen it on the big screen. So like I've never even seen it on the big screen. I've only seen it on TV. So I think like maybe in one of these smaller film festivals, like Salem or St. Augustine, here in Florida, they're about to have their first horror festival in this October. And so maybe some of these smaller horror festivals might want to like have a feature. And you know what? Vincent D'Onofrio seems like the coolest dude. Like, I bet that if he found out that you were going to show his movie, or if you went through everything to get the permission, he might even show up to do a little Q&A with people. And I've also been really curious to reach out to the band, but I haven't been able to I haven't been able to find them. So like, I think that would be really cool too, as if the band might get together and like perform some of the songs from the movie. Maybe they would even you could tie that in with a screening. I think there's a lot of like multimedia things that you could do with this movie that would help people to see it now, because I really like we were talking about in the beginning. There's something about this film that feels like a time capsule, and I think that maybe the moment for people to really appreciate it is more now than it was back then. In 2 years it'll be the 15-year anniversary, because it came out when in 2010, right? Was
Yeah,
it 2010 or 2010? Yeah.
2010.
So then the 15-year anniversary is in 2025. So like maybe something around that 15-year anniversary would be something worthwhile doing. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it would be really cool if anyone could get in touch with the band members, because I think there's a lot that you could do with like with them being involved with anything about the film being, I don't know, shown again at a festival or so, or I don't know. And I think that you could. So like, who are some of these other, because like there's a lot of musicians who've been using horror, and I wonder if there's a way to tie in this film with them as well. um
Hey, the weekend. Can you can you come
Okay.
in here and
All right, The Weekend. Here's my pitch. It's a cover album, but it's only songs that were part of the 2010 horror film Don't Go in the Woods. You're going to sell millions.
but for real though, but can you imagine like if someone, like some other musician picked up these songs, but then they would they finish them, or would they end them as abruptly as they end, right? Like, see that there's just so much creative, there's like a lot of creative stuff that people could, that they could do, that could come from this. But I think you probably have to peg it around an anniversary or something, because that seems to be like the way that people kind of rediscover things these days, is on a one of these big birthdays. So I don't know, maybe I'll add that to my list of things to do in the next couple of years, because I really am such an advocate for this movie, and I would just, yeah, I think, yeah, especially after hearing, like, both of you, like, you, especially you, Donato, watching it again and like having a new feeling about it. I think a lot of people might feel the same, seeing it now rather than when it first came out. So yeah, I think I am gonna add this to my list. I've already had a chat with Mr. Vincent on Twitter, so like he knows who I am,
I love it.
right? Just like slide back into his DMs and see if he'll talk to me. But what do you guys think?
so that is like you've said the correct answer, I think already. It would benefit tremendously from a, hey, come see this little indie slasher that Vincent D'Onofrio directed, and he'll be there and he'll answer some questions and maybe he'll sing about Jesus. Who knows? But I think that's the entry point that people would need. It's a hard sell with the flat acting, and like that's the hard part. The barrier for entry is way higher for this movie, because it, it's just not going to work for some people, and it is going to be completely off for them. Even I think for horror musical fans, it's going to be hard for them to kind of adhere to what D'Onofrio is, intentionally doing with the performances. But we are on the crux of a 15-year anniversary. We are approaching, the idea that any movie can find a second life with the right redistribution at the right partner label or something like that. So like, you're thinking of like a Vinegar Syndrome, or one of their partner labels that do more contemporary films, to maybe say, hey, I was just actually Googling to see if it ever had like a decent Blu-ray release, and I couldn't find anything immediately. So that's the kind of thing that would need to happen. I'm going to go play Warzone in a few minutes with Brad Henderson, and he's acquiring movies left and right for his label. And I'm going to be like, yo, man, look into this one. See if this ever had a good release, because I think you could do a lot here with, like, re-releasing this oddball horror musical, just best described as quote unquote weird, but it's just the fitting descriptor. But yeah, it's just one of those tough ones, because you're either going to be in and or out of it in the first few minutes, and it's going to earn its haters as much as it earns its fans, given how Rotten Tomatoes has one single positive review out of 8 on there. So it's a hard one, and it's a disclaimer, it's a warning. I want to preface that for anyone going out to try it, but it it deserves to be tried. That is like any movie will have its audience. Any movie deserves it. But even with all the things that we are saying and I am saying, it absolutely deserves just a shot.
Yes, agreed, co-signed.
I think my only note on that would be that, as both of you were talking, I was thinking we movie fans were able to sort of repair, not that he went anywhere, but repair the career of Nick Cage by doing things like having, the uncaged film festivals that would play at the Alamo Drafthouse. I think our boy Vinny D here is probably well poised for his own, I'm just like the Salton Sea, The Cell, Happy Accidents, The 13th Floor, right? Like there are so many things in his filmography that are interesting and niche and would play as part of like whatever you want to call it, like the Danoff Festival or whatever, like whatever kind of name you want to give it. And then I think that this is sort of like the secret screening at the end of the thing, right? Like this is the thing that people don't know about, and they go because they want to see The Cell, they go because they want to go see the Salton Sea and watch him play Pooh Bear. But this is the movie they come away and be like, holy shit, I can't believe that this is when he directed. So if we're looking for our next legendary leading man / character actor to get the like book 6 movies in one day around just his filmography, I think he's a great actor to do that with. And I think that Don't Go in the Woods would be a great film to sort of end that whole thing with, a real kicker at the end of the festival.
Oh gosh. Oh, how do we make this happen now?
I'm already thinking about it. I'm going to go, like I said, I'm going to talk to Henderson. I'm going to go hit up Alamo Drafthouse Los Angeles, and I don't know. Let's see what happens.
Donato's already on this.
Yeah, I'm gonna start tweeting at Mr. Vincent every day. Get him to talk to me.
Answer your DMs, Mr. D'Onofrio.
I'm not being weird. I just love your movie. Please answer your DMs. Well, Sezin, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You have been an amazing guest, and you brought us a film that, like as always, just so much crunchier than I think that Donato and I expect these conversations to go. We know we have good guests, we know we have good conversations, but it's movies like this that always take us a little bit in a left direction, hard left, and we love it for that. For those that want to stay on top of the work that you're currently doing, take a moment, promote yourself. Where do people follow you on social media? Your Twitter, your LinkedIn, whatever bios you have, whatever places you want to share, your author bio. Where do they go to find more about your work?
So I'm just at Sezin Koehler basically on all of the socials. I'm very Googleable. I'm the only Sezin Koehler in the world, so it's very easy. It's scary easy to find me. And so yeah, so at the moment I'm working on I just got my first book deal, and the book is called Much Ado About Keanu: Toward a Critical Reeves Theory. And it's a deep dive into his entire filmography and all of his creative outputs, including the motorcycle company, including his comic book, everything. And so that's what I'm working on at the moment, and that should be out. That'll be out in summer of 2024. But in the meantime, I will be starting a Substack with like some of the deleted scenes from the book and other Keanu writings. At some point in the next few months, I'll start that up. So yeah, so if you just follow me like on my Twitter or my Facebook or whatever, like you'll get updates from all the Keanu stuff on there. And yeah, that's basically what I'm doing. That's the big thing that I'm doing right now. And I also have been working with Entertainment Weekly, so I post those links on my socials all the time. And if you like orchids, I actually post a lot about my orchids on my Instagram, and that's the only one that's a different name. That's Zuzu Kohler on there. But even if you look up Sezin Kohler, I'm still the only one, so you'll still be able to find me. But yeah, I have a lot of orchids. I rescue orchids as like my side, just like one of my side things, and they live outside. And yeah, I post them a lot on my Instagram, and it's orchid season right now. So if you really like to see beautiful flowers that were basically in the garbage that I rescued and brought back to life, it's my Instagram's pretty cool for that. And yeah, and thank you guys so much for having me. This was so much fun. Oh my gosh. I'm so happy right now. This was I'm just being able to talk about one of my favorite movies of all time, and just with two smart ass dudes, just like, oh, this was just fantastic.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Donato, promote yourself too. You got a lot going on.
Yeah, lots going on forever and for eternity. At Donato Bomb on Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram, and Hive is still chugging along, so you can find me still there too. Recent things I have written about include, but do not only are not only restricted to PG-13 horror, gateway horror, and Megan. I reviewed like 4 movies last week. I post a lot of the events I've been going to, so nice pictures of all people dressed in suits and cool things. So yeah, at Donato Bomb, just follow me and maybe interact with me. Tell me I'm smart. Tell me I'm a part of two smart ass dudes. I'll take that.
Yes.
And as for myself, you can find me on Twitter at Matt Monagle for the time being. Twitter is still a thing. I would encourage y'all, if you liked what you heard today, and if you want to go check out Sezin's original post that kind of put us on this journey about Don't Go in the Woods, You can visit www.certifiedforgotten.com. We also encourage you to visit and consider supporting our Patreon. It's patreon.com/certifiedforgotten. We have tiers as low as one couple dollars a month, $3 a month. And the reason for that is because we do publish a little bit of exclusive content. We have video wrap ups that we do every month with some of the best stuff that Donato and I have watched. We've got the Film School from Hell series where Donato chooses really good, really bad, just incredibly not me movies for me to watch and write about. And that's always a fun, air quotes, fun experience for me. So please consider supporting us, and let's see if we can't get up, like Sezin was saying, into a couple more articles a month. We'd love that. But Sezin, we will definitely see you back again on the podcast. Looking forward to having you back on the website again soon. Donato, my friend, will you please take us home?
Random melodica death noises.